Blake Lively just fired her entire legal team, and not in a quiet, professional way. We're talking full meltdown energy. Sources say she was throwing things, screaming, the whole 9 yards. And honestly, when you find out what her lawyers actually did, you kind of get it, because what they pulled off was genuinely embarrassing. Not for Blake, well, also for Blake, but mostly for a group of supposedly experienced entertainment attorneys who somehow managed to make mistakes that a first-year law student would get roasted for in class. So, here's where I want to start. Blake went into this whole Justin Baldoni situation thinking she had $161 million lawsuit. That was the number her team was throwing around, $161 million in damages. She was clearly expecting to walk out of this as the wronged party, the woman who stood up, the one who fought back and won. Instead, she walked away with a zero settlement. Nothing. Not a single dollar. And the crazy part is that a huge chunk of why she lost comes down to her own lawyers filing paperwork so badly that Justin Baldoni's legal team didn't even have to work that hard to tear it down. The first mistake, and this one is almost hard to believe, her lawyers filed her claims as if she was an employee on the set of It Ends With Us. Except Blake wasn't an employee. She was a producer. She was an independent contractor. That distinction matters enormously in employment law because the types of claims you can make, the protections you're entitled to, the whole legal foundation of your case, all of it changes depending on how you're classified. And her team got it completely wrong. Brian Friedman, who was Justin's attorney, basically picked that apart immediately. Blake's lawyers handed him the ammunition to attack the entire case before it even got going. It was like showing up to argue about a contract and accidentally bringing the wrong contract. And then there's the jurisdiction thing, which somehow is even worse. They filed portions of her case under California employment law, which would be fine, except the events they were suing over happened in New Jersey. Different state, completely different legal framework, different standards for what counts as retaliation, what counts as harassment, different courts, different procedures. You can't just pick the state with the laws you like better and file there. That's called forum shopping, and courts do not look kindly on it. And in this case, the judge didn't let it pass either. When you file in the wrong jurisdiction, you risk getting your entire case thrown out and having to start over. Except by the time you're starting over, you've probably blown through deadlines and created problems that follow you into the refiling. That's exactly what happened here. The case fell apart at the foundation, and Blake was left staring at a zero settlement, wondering how things got so bad so fast. Now, here's what I actually think happened behind the scenes. I think her lawyers either genuinely didn't do their research about where the events occurred, or they made a calculated bet that California courts would be more favorable to Blake's narrative and just went for it. And honestly, both options are terrible. If they didn't know where the events happened, that's just incompetence. Basic case research? If they knew and filed in California anyway, hoping to get a friendlier judge, that's worse, because it means they were trying to manipulate the system and they got caught doing it. Either way, Blake is the one who paid for it. Literally. Because she did pay for it, we're talking potentially millions in legal fees for a case that was structurally broken from day one. And when Blake finally figured out the full picture, when she actually understood what her lawyers had done and what it meant for her case, that is reportedly when everything collapsed. People close to the situation have described her reaction as nothing short of chaotic. We're talking about a person who was already under enormous pressure, already losing public support, already dealing with the PR fallout from the leaked text messages. And then she finds out on top of all that her own legal team had been billing her heavily while quietly destroying any shot she had of winning. I don't even fully blame her for losing it. That would make anyone furious. But the way Blake handles anger, and this is a pattern that people who've been around her have talked about for years, is that she doesn't just get upset and then process it. She goes scorched earth. And this time, the target was the people who were supposed to be defending her. Shortly after the meltdown, multiple members of her legal team started leaving. And that detail matters a lot more than it might seem on the surface. Lawyers don't quit cases easily. They lose money when they walk away. They risk looking like they couldn't handle the client. There's always professional reputation on the line. So, when you have multiple attorneys all choosing to leave around the same time, something genuinely bad happened in that relationship. Something that made continuing to work with Blake more of a burden than the fees were worth. And here's the uncomfortable part for Blake. Those departures almost certainly came with non-disclosure agreements, non-disparagement clauses, meaning she is legally prevented from going out publicly and telling everyone that her lawyers were incompetent. She can't tweet about it. She can't give interviews about the technical errors. She can't even really frame herself as the victim of bad legal advice without risking a legal mess of her own making. The woman who built so much of her narrative around controlling the story is now contractually restricted from telling the most important part of the story she's currently living. So what does Blake Lively do when she can't talk about it publicly? She finds another legal path to fight through, and that's where the fee arbitration comes in. Fee arbitration is basically Blake's way of formally saying her lawyers did such a bad job that she wants her money back. It's a process where an independent arbitrator looks at the work the attorneys did and decides whether they actually earned what they were paid. And Blake has reportedly initiated exactly that, which on the surface sounds like a smart move. You got billed millions for a broken case. You want some of it back. You go through the proper channels to make that argument. But here's where it gets genuinely tricky for her. In order to prove that her lawyers did a bad job in arbitration, Blake is going to have to show exactly what went wrong. And that means waiving attorney-client privilege, that protected bubble that exists between a client and their lawyer. Every strategy conversation, every piece of advice they gave her, every email, every phone call where someone said, "Here's what we think you should do." All of that becomes potentially visible once she decides to go this route. The whole point of attorney-client privilege is that you can be completely honest with your lawyer without worrying that those conversations are going to come back and haunt you. The moment you waive it, you are opening every single one of those doors. And given what we already know about this case, you have to wonder what is sitting in those communications, because Blake was not exactly playing a fair game throughout this whole situation. The leaked text messages, the alleged coordination with publicists to shape media narratives, the claims about what was said and done on that set. If any of the strategy discussions between Blake and her attorneys touch on any of that, and they almost certainly do, then this arbitration process could reveal things that are far more damaging to Blake than the attorney fees themselves. People who follow this stuff closely have pointed out that she probably already regrets starting this whole process because the fee arbitration might technically stay confidential, but these things have a way of surfacing. And even if it doesn't leak, the process itself forces Blake to relive and document every mistake, every bad decision, every moment where the strategy went wrong. That is not a comfortable exercise when the underlying case was as messy as this one was. And beyond the arbitration, there is also talk of Blake potentially pursuing a full legal malpractice claim against her former lawyers, which is a much bigger and more serious step. Malpractice isn't just saying your lawyer did a bad job. It's saying their intentional misconduct or negligence directly caused you to lose something you otherwise would have won. And that second part is where it gets really hard for Blake, because to win a malpractice case, she doesn't just have to prove her lawyers messed up. She has to prove that if they had done everything correctly, she would have won. Think about what that actually requires her to argue. She has to build a version of events where the employment classification was correct, where the case was filed in the right jurisdiction, where everything was handled perfectly, and then show that even with all of that, she still would have come out on top against Justin Baldoni. But Justin's side had the leaked text messages, they had the media coordination evidence, they had the proof on the public relations campaign that was allegedly run against him. Even with perfect lawyering, Blake was working against a mountain of damaging information that was already out there. Proving she would have won, in some alternate universe version of this case, is an incredibly high bar to meet. There's also something people have started calling the settle and sue strategy that's been discussed in discussions about what Blake might be doing here. The idea is that you settle the original lawsuit to make it go away, and then you turn around and sue your lawyers for the bad outcome, trying to recover money from a second source for what was essentially one disaster. And judges genuinely do not like this. It comes across as someone who is trying to pull money from multiple pockets for the same problem, rather than someone who is genuinely wronged and is seeking fair compensation. When a court sees someone settle a case quietly and then immediately pivot to blaming their lawyers, the obvious question is, why didn't you raise the lawyer issue before settling? Why agree to the settlement if you thought your attorneys were the real problem? It looks calculated. It looks like hunting for whoever has the deepest pockets left to blame. And for Blake, who is already dealing with serious credibility issues after everything that came out during this saga, another move that reads as scheming and self-serving is the last thing she needs. Because let's not forget the bigger picture here. Blake went into this whole thing claiming $161 million in damages. She had a PR machine running. She had public statements. She had the sympathetic framing of a woman standing up against a powerful man on a film set. And the outcome of all of that, a $0 settlement. Nothing confirmed, nothing awarded, nothing on the record that says Blake Lively was right about any of it. Just a quiet, confidential settlement that tells the world the case is closed and leaves everything else up to interpretation. For someone who allegedly cares deeply about how she is perceived, about being seen as a winner, about controlling the narrative around her own life, this outcome has to sting in a very particular way. She didn't just lose. She lost publicly, expensively, and in a way that raised more questions about her own conduct than it answered about Justin's. And now she's trying to claw back some of the money she spent on lawyers who she feels let her down while being contractually restricted from talking about why she feels that way, while potentially having to expose her most private legal communications to do it. The situation she's in right now is genuinely complicated in every direction. And here's the thing that keeps coming back to me when I look at all of this: the pattern. Because this isn't the first time Blake Lively has ended up in a situation where the people around her became the problem. There's a whole history here that makes this feel less like a run of bad luck and more like a natural result for someone who has treated professional relationships as transactional for a very long time. Take the contractor situation. There were stories circulating for a while about Blake allegedly making workers wait for payment. People who did work for her completed jobs, expected to get paid on a reasonable timeline, and then had to follow up for the money. And while that was happening, she was apparently out buying more Hermes bags. I'm not saying that as a throwaway dig. I'm saying it because it tells you something about priorities, about who matters and who doesn't in Blake's world. And now, ironically, she's the one sitting on the other side of that equation. She's the one who feels like she paid for work that wasn't done properly. She's the one pursuing money back from people who she feels didn't deliver. The symmetry there is almost too clean. Then there's the Taylor Swift situation. The allegation that Blake tried to use Taylor's private text messages, threatened to leak them to get what she wanted during this whole Baldoni mess. Taylor Swift, who was supposed to be one of her closest friends, one of the most powerful people in the entertainment industry. And allegedly Blake looked at that friendship and saw a tool she could use, a pressure point. And when Taylor didn't play along the way Blake wanted, that relationship reportedly broke in a very significant way. You don't come back easily from trying to use someone's private words against them, especially not someone with Taylor's level of influence and loyalty from her own circle. And now her lawyers, the people who were literally paid to be on her side, to protect her interests, to build the strongest possible case for her, they're gone. Multiple of them left around the same time, and the case they left behind was a zero settlement built on misclassified employment status and wrong jurisdiction filings. Blake burned through her contractors, allegedly pushed away one of the most powerful allies she had in the industry, and then watched her own legal team either quit or get fired after running up a massive bill for work that didn't hold up. At some point, the common thread becomes impossible to miss, and the common thread is Blake. I want to be fair here because I think there's a version of the story where some genuine mistakes were made by people who should have known better. Her lawyers really did file in the wrong jurisdiction. They really did misclassify her employment status. Those are real errors that a competent legal team should not be making. Blake has some legitimate grievance there, but the way she responded to those errors, the explosive reaction, the meltdown, the scorched earth approach to everyone around her, that's also very telling, because when things go wrong, the people who tend to come out okay are the ones who can recalibrate, adjust, work with what they have. Blake's response to discovering her case was flawed, was apparently to make the situation even more unstable. And then there's the Met Gala image that a lot of people have pointed to as kind of the visual representation of everything. Blake Lively on the red carpet surrounded by her security detail, looking completely isolated. None of the warmth, none of the effortless Hollywood royalty energy she used to project. Just someone who looks like they know the room has shifted and they're not sure how to get it back. That image stuck with people because it felt true to the moment. The connections are gone, the goodwill has evaporated, and the legal fight she was supposed to win ended with nothing. The career question is the one that I genuinely don't have a clean answer to because Hollywood has forgiven a lot of people for a lot of things over the years. But what tends to be unforgivable is being seen as difficult to work with in a way that creates legal and financial chaos for everyone around you. Directors and producers talk, studios talk, and the story coming out of the Baldoni situation is not a flattering one for Blake from a professional standpoint. The phone reportedly isn't ringing the way it used to. Projects aren't getting announced. The momentum she had coming off It Ends With Us, which by the way was actually a box office success despite everything, that momentum has completely disappeared. And Ryan Reynolds is his own conversation because Ryan has spent years building a very specific brand. The charming, self-deprecating, funny husband who is also a savvy businessman, Aviation Gin, Rex MFF, Maximum Effort. He has built something real and valuable outside of just being a movie star, and all of that is now sitting in the shadow of whatever is happening with Blake. How long does someone with that much to protect ride out a situation that keeps generating negative headlines? That's not a question I can answer, but it's a question a lot of people are asking quietly. What Blake Lively needed at every stage of this situation was someone around her who could tell her the truth. A lawyer who would say, We need to get the classification right before we file anything. A PR person who would say, this strategy is going to backfire. A friend who would say, you cannot use Taylor's messages as leverage. That is not something you come back from. But the people who tell you the truth are usually the people who don't last long in that kind of environment. And when you surround yourself only with people who tell you what you want to hear, eventually you end up alone on a red carpet wondering where everyone went. She paid millions for a case that won her nothing. She lost her legal team, her publicists, potentially one of the most important friendships of her career. And the fee arbitration she's now pursuing might end up costing her more in exposed communications than she ever gets back in returned fees. That is the full picture of where Blake Lively is right now. And honestly, it is a lot.